Today I'm going to talk about writing your first paper for publication. And in one way I'm sorry to be doing that because when I was a postgraduate student there was no expectation that we would publish before we graduated. And I'm sorry to say the pressure to publish, the pressure for jobs, the competition, all of that burden is on the shoulders of young early career researchers, and I think it's a shame that this is the case, but you have to cope with it. So let's have a look at what needs to be done when you write your first research paper. The thing I want to stress to you is that writing a paper for publication is not exactly the same as writing a thesis or a dissertation. If you write a dissertation, somebody has to read it. Your tutors, your examiners are paid to read it. But if you're writing an article for publication, nobody has to read it. You've got half a page to grab the attention of your audience and explain why it is that they need to read it. I hardly need to explain this. You're from the generation that told me that 30 minutes is too long for a video. You're the digital generation. Grabbing attention of people is the most important thing. So in your introduction, you need to spell out why it is that the person who's your intended audience needs to read the article. Probably, if you're writing for an international journal, your audience is international, and so you need to grab the attention of the international audience. And I'm sorry to say, I'm sitting in my study reading the journal or looking at the journal online, and I'm not interested in what happens in a rural school in Wales. I'm not interested in what happens in an inner city school in Buenos Aires. I might be interested if you can explain that it's an example of something that's going on worldwide. There's depopulation of rural areas across wide swathes of the world, and I'm going to look at an example in rural Wales as to why or how this affects the provision of education to rural populations, or the pressure on urban schools from mass migration from the country to the city. And as an example, I'm going to look for what happens in a school in urban Buenos Aires to illustrate a point that is more widely relevant, that will appeal to an international audience. Just because you're interested in a topic, it doesn't mean that everybody else is going to be interested in the topic unless you explain the relevance to the person who you are hoping to read. Better still, if you can find a debate that your piece of research relates to, it adds evidence to one side or another of a debate. Better still, even than that, if you can find a debate going on in the pages of a journal. This is a debate over how rural education is provided in a specialist journal. You find a debate that you plug into, then you've not only identified a reason why the readers of that journal will be interested, but you've identified a good journal to submit your paper to in the first place. So the introduction, it's got to grab the attention of the potential audience straight off the bat. You've got half a page in order to persuade your potential reader that this is an interesting topic for you to look at. It's not always easy to tell when you've written something yourself whether it's going to be of general interest. Try it on a friend. I remember my first attempt at a published paper years ago. A friend read it and said to me, I'm interested in this topic, but even I can't read what you've written. It's just the language is too difficult, it doesn't attract my attention, it's not. And you may well say, with friends like that, who needs enemies? But if you give a friend a chance to read it, they may well show you where you are using jargon that puts people off, where you're assuming things that were not you can't expect your audience to know. All of those things, a friendly reader, a critical reader, but a friendly reader can help you identify those faults in your introduction. Once you've written the introduction, the next step will be, well, you'll be familiar with the idea from writing a thesis that there should be a literature review. Now, the literature review doesn't need to be exhaustive. You're not proving that you know the field in the same way as you might feel you have to prove you know the field if you're writing a thesis. If you're writing your dissertation, you're writing a literature review in your article. It doesn't need a separate heading saying literature review, but you need to use the literature to provide the setting for the argument that you're going to present in your paper. The one possible use, as I've already mentioned, is to identify a debate in the literature that you're going to plug into. Well, that will be very clear use of the literature. Otherwise, you might be wanting to show that your topic is relevant to a wider audience than they may suspect from the title, or to explain how your specific study relates to a broader theoretical issue. In every case, it's not just a question of dropping a literature citation into the text. You've got to explain why it's there. You've got to use your literature wisely. And I always think that you can tell the difference between the paper written by the more experienced author and the first-time author of a paper. The first-time author of a paper tends to have much longer bibliography, much more literature cited, but used much less well. So use a few references, not the general references about method. Cohen and Mannion, Yip or Cresswell, whatever those books you've used about general methods in your thesis, forget about those. You're writing for a specialist audience in an academic journal. People will know those references. They're looking for the specific background of your study and the specific way you're linking it to the wider debates and discussions going on. So the literature review is more focused and more purposeful than is your literature review in your dissertation. What comes after the literature review in your dissertation? Probably your section on methods or methodology. Again, you don't need a separate section on methods. You don't need to go into the broader issues of paradigms and quantitative versus qualitative and all of that stuff your readers know about already. They simply want to know what you did. If you're reporting the views of teachers in a school, how many teachers did you interview? How did you interview them? It's just you're providing enough about the methods so that the people understand, your readers understand, what's the basis on which you are offering evidence. Did you, when you wanted to know whether students performed better, was it self-reporting of the students themselves, or did you have tests that you applied, or did you use tests that the school applied anyway? What was the basis on which you're claiming to have evidence that relates to the topic that you're reporting on? So again, you're telling a story, so there won't it won't necessarily come under a separate heading called methods, but you're giving enough about the methods to explain how it is you know what you know. And then you're going to report your results in some form. You'll be reporting your results, but again, not just reporting word for word what you've found in interviews, not just telling the bald facts. You're also trying to show your reader how you interpret those results, how what you've seen in your study feeds into the discussions that are happening around your topic, what those results mean to you. If it's direct first primary research results, what your interviewee said and what you understood them to mean when you're putting them in the context of your discussion. Or your results might simply be from, if your methods are from studying the literature, an analysis of policies, what was it about the policies that suggested to you a mindset on the part of the policymaker that feeds into the discussion that you're having before? The results are not simply results. You have the privilege, I think you have the duty as the author to be guiding your reader through to show how you see the results and how you see the results fitting into the discussion that you've earlier highlighted through the literature and identified in the introduction. And then finally, coming to the conclusions as to what it was that you believe you found out. And that's important. I think this is the motivation for writing. You've found something out. You've done a study, you've found something out. Don't you want to tell the world what you've found out? You want to tell them about your conclusions, and your conclusions will link back to the debates you've identified, the issues you've identified earlier, and that will give you a rounded return to show where you've made a contribution, what you're saying that feeds into the earlier basis of knowledge that's been written about before. Lots of other questions that you might have, such as writing style. Try to keep the writing style simple, try not to use a lot of jargon, try to make it easy for your reader to follow through your argument and to make sure that you're as clear as possible. This is not about writing clever language. In the words of, I think, G.K. Chesterton, if you ever write something that you think is particularly good, cross it out immediately. So don't try to be clever with the writing. Plain, simple language. Explain what you're going to study, how it fits into what's already known, how you're getting the evidence, what you've found, and what you conclude. Always best to do some reading of the journals that you think you might be aiming your paper to. That will tell you a lot about the style. It will tell you a lot about what the content of the journal is. It will tell you a lot about who reads the journal and what their interests are. So read issues of the journal that you're aiming to get published in so that you've got an idea of what appeals. What will appeal to the readership. And lastly, you need to write an abstract for the paper. Now, I've left the abstract till last because the abstract is not a part of the paper. The abstract is a description of the paper so that somebody should be able to read the abstract on its own and decide whether they want to read your paper. By the same token, they should be able to read the paper without having read the abstract. So just because you've said something in the abstract doesn't mean it doesn't have to be in the introduction. It must be in the introduction. The abstract is a description of the paper as a whole, and that includes the conclusions. You don't spoil the story by telling people what the ending is. The abstract ought to be the whole deal, so that when somebody reads that 150, 200 words of abstract, they'll say, oh, okay, I know what I'm going to be told at the end of this. That's something I want to know, how they knew that, how they found that out. That's what I want to read, and then they'll be able to read the whole paper. But the abstract is not part of the paper. It's quite a separate thing altogether. Do not make the mistake of thinking because you've introduced a topic in the abstract, that is the introduction. It is not. The abstract and the introduction are different. Also, it's not a bad idea to write the abstract at the end. I mean, very often authors will write the abstract at the beginning, then write the paper, come to the conclusions, and the abstract will no longer reflect the paper. It won't be a description of the paper, because what's happened is that as you've written the paper has changed slightly. So do make sure, check at least, that the abstract is a description of the paper that you've submitted. So when you've got all of that done, as I say, well worth letting a friend have agreed to check that you've made statements that are clear. There are a few things that, working with various editors over the years, I've learned. If ever you have the word "this" at the beginning of a sentence, do make sure that it's clear what this refers to. If you have, if you say there are 3 reasons for this, make sure that you give 3 reasons and not 5. So make sure you're consistent through the paper. Make sure that you refer back to where you came from, whether you're going to promise things in the introduction. Make sure you go back to them in the conclusion and check that you've dotted all the T's and crossed all the I's, or whichever way round you choose to do it. And your paper is then ready to be sent off to the editor. And that's the thing that I wanted to talk to you about today. I wanted to talk to you today about preparing your first paper for publication. What I'm going to do next is to talk about what happens to the paper then. Okay, so that's be careful to make sure that you've highlighted what is of general interest, what's the reason. Think of your audience. This is probably the first time in writing for a paper for publication that you have to think of your audience. Think of what will interest them and what they need to know. For your dissertation, for your thesis, your audience is fixed. They have to read it. Now you're in a different business. You're in the business of hooking somebody's attention. We live in an attention economy, we're told. Make sure you pay attention to that fact and make sure that your work grabs the attention of the people that you want to read it. And that should produce a jolly good paper. So good luck with that.